Hi and welcome back to this beginner series. We are going into animating this time. We're going to look at keyframing the scene, and we will be jumping into the graph editor and taking a look at the dope sheet as well. So before we confuse you thoroughly, let's get into our scene. And if we go to our 3D view, you can see where we left off last time. We are currently in the middle of a storm, so let's jump back to the first frame. There are lots of different ways you can animate. You can add an armature and use bones to create actions whereby moving the bone will move an object, or you can go into the constraints menu and use these different settings and functions to create your animation. But in the end, what it all comes down to really is the keyframe. I'm just going to delete that bone, we're not going to be using it. I'll just hide my menus. Now what a keyframe is a point in time along your timeline that an event happens. So by putting a keyframe at frame 0 and a keyframe at the end and telling Blender what to do within those keyframes is how we create the animations. So in this episode, that's all we're going to cover, and we're going to show you how to simply create some movement. First, I'm going to set the ground to rotate. I'm going to bring back my toolbar, and on the first frame, I'm going to click the Insert Keyframes button from my toolbar. Click Insert Keyframe, and then you get a drop-down menu giving you the different functions that you can actually keyframe. And as what we're aiming for is to have the road to be spinning, we're going to click the rotation keyframe, and you'll see we now have a yellow line on our timeline, and that indicates that there is a keyframe at that point. So if I press that back to the start, now if I press, actually I'm going to hide the second layer so we're not getting all the particles. I do that simply by left clicking on the layer that I want to keep visible. And now you see that second layer is hidden. So we get back to it. Now I've placed a keyframe on the first frame, and I've moved my timeline to the end frame, and I need to tell Blender that it needs to do something within that space. And what I'm going to do is press 3 on my number pad, and I want to rotate this cylinder a full 360 degrees. So if I type R, X, 360, you'll see the trees have jumped around. I press my left mouse button to confirm. I press Insert Keyframe for the Keyframes menu and press Rotation. Now in theory that should rotate, and if I drag the timeline, nothing's happening. And that's because Blender doesn't realise that it's done a full 360 degree turn. Because the start point and end point are in the same place, it can't calculate what it sees as being in the middle. So I'm going to bring back my information panel. I'm going to scroll to the top, and under the rotation you'll see it's already at 90 on the X because we turned it in object mode previously, so it already has some rotation applied. Don't worry about that, it's this extra rotation that we need. And as you see, as I go through the timeline, Blender can't interpret where to put the rotation. So now once it gets back to the last frame, the keyframe for the last frame is the same as the original frame, which is not what we want. Go to the Y instead, see if that's the right one, and now because that's on 0 we can simply type in the amount that we want, 360, press enter, press I to set the keyframes, jump back to the start with our timeline mark tools, and we'll press play again, and now we see that we are rotating. And if we look through our camera view by pressing 0, doesn't that look just fantastic? We are already halfway there with this animation. If I just pause that though, we go into textured view. There we go. Now if I continue to press play, you'll see that our wheels aren't moving, but the road is. So we need to keyframe these wheels. And that is the simplest thing. Because we have mirrors and an array on the wheels, we can simply animate the first wheel, and that should give us some interesting results. So let's go back to the start, select the wheel, press I over the rotation keyframes, and that sets those up at 0 degrees. And now, because we want the wheels to be moving in the opposite direction to the road, we want them to rotate in the negative direction. So if I move my timeline 40 frames ahead, I select the X, because this time it should be on the X, because there's no rotation on the scene. So if I now press 360 and press enter, press I to keyframe the rotation, and go back to the start, press play. Oh, that's not what we're looking for, is it? I said we'd get some interesting results. Okay, and the reason for that is because the rotation is based on the center point of the mesh, and we want that center point to be in the center of the wheel that's spinning, but obviously that's going to create these back wheels to be spinning around the middle, so we need to separate these back wheels, keyframe the front wheels with this origin point in the center. So first things first, and I need to select the array modifier and apply that. So now that modifier is applied, and these wheels should be a separate mesh, which we will see in edit mode now. As you can see, these are a separate object, but on the back the wheels are still mirrored, which is what we want. So now if I select this back wheel, I can simply click one of the vertices and press L, and that will select all the vertices linked to that object. Now if I press P, separate selection, that has now become a separate object. I still have this issue with the origin point being in the center of the car. So I need to bring it to be in the center of the wheels, but also at the same time I need it in the center of the mesh because of the mirror modifier. So I will select my wheel, pressing it, press A to select all, or L to press or select all the linked objects. I have my back wheel selected, so if I just pop into object mode quickly and select my front wheels, now those back wheels are deselected. I'll go back into edit mode, and now I need to bring the 3D cursor to the center of these wheels, and I do that by pressing Shift S, snap, cursor to selected, and that's brought the cursor into the middle of the car wheel, and I want it in the actual middle of the mesh. So if I press in my toolbar under 3D cursor, if I press that, press the X value, press 0, that should now be in the middle, because the car is still, it hasn't moved from the X axis, we haven't moved it left or right. So that's ideally what we want. And now we can go back into object mode, go to origin on our toolbar, origin to 3D cursor, that's brought it to the front, and the mirroring is still active. And now we can get on and keyframe these wheels. So now we have already the keyframes applied. If I press play and see what happens, you'll see the car moves, but again those back wheels are still moving around their own 3D cursor. Let's jump back, we'll select the back wheels, and we don't need keyframes for these, and I'll show you why in just a moment. So I will remove the keyframe there, delete keyframe, yep. Go to the first frame, click remove keyframe from the toolbar, that's done. Now we need to do the same trick with the back wheels that we did for the front. Head into edit mode, Shift S, cursor to selected, press X on the 3D cursor location panel, type 0 to send it back onto the center line. Go back into object mode, click origin to 3D cursor, and now the origin for the back wheels is in the center between the mirrored wheel and the back wheel. And now I said we don't need a keyframe for the back wheels, but obviously we want it to spin. So what I'm going to do is take this circle here, and in my toolbar, in my information panel, where it says item, I just scroll down to item, where it says circle. I'm just going to change that to front wheel. Press enter. Click on the back wheels now. Do the same for those, except I will call them back wheels. That's it. Now if I click on the back wheels with my right mouse button so they're selected, now if I go to my properties tabs and I click on this chain tab, this brings up our object constraints. If I open that and I choose a copy rotation transform constraint, I select the target as the front wheel. Now whatever that front wheel does, that back wheel should copy it. And we'll just press play. Okay, somehow deleting the keyframes removed it from both wheels. I'm going to have to put these keyframes back in. I do that just by repeating the process. Select the first timeline with the front wheel selected, press insert keyframe rotation, go to frame 40, type 360 on the X value, hover over the X value and press I. Now if we go back to the start and press play, you'll see that the front wheels and the back wheels are now moving. If I right click on the back wheels, you'll see there are no keyframes. It is simply copying the movement because of this constraint. And that's it. Except you can see obviously the wheels are no longer moving. And that's because we only had keyframes up to frame 40. Once they got to that point, there was no more information for them to keyframe to. But we can fix that, and we're going to fix it now by going to the graph editor. So if we open up a new window by clicking on the little triangle dashed line in the corner and dragging upwards, and I'll go to my bottom window, click on the editor menu and choose graph editor, and if I choose the front wheel, if I scroll out, you can see this red line that shoots up. That line is simply a graph indicating the time and the action. So this line will go all the way up to 360 according to this menu. If I drag it right up to 300, you can see from 0 to 360 is a movement over time, but we want that to repeat. So when it gets to 360, it does another 360 over the same amount of time. We do that by clicking on the channel, going to extrapolation mode, and you'll see we get a list. Third one down, make cyclic F modifier, gives us the repeating pattern along our timeline. And now you can see that that first set of keyframes is repeated. But you also see it slows down and stops. That's because of the handle types are set to Bezier curves, and what we want is to change them to a linear curve. And now you see that our graph has become a sharp, nice jagged point, and what that means is these points are now linear curves, so they go straight up and carry on straight down. Whereas previously, the Bezier curve, we have this little slope on the curve. It's getting a bit closer, and that simply means that over time it's taking a longer amount of time to get to this point, so it slows down, stops, starts again. So if I press T, change it back to linear, that curve's gone, so it just carries straight on. Now if I click the road, you'll see we have that same sloping curve, and because the wheels are now going at a constant speed, when the road slows down and stops, it looks kind of silly because the road's slowing down but the car's wheels aren't. So we'll do the same for this. Press T to bring up our keyframe interpolation mode, switch the keyframe to linear, and that makes the road nice and smooth. And that's our animation done. But I think we can make the wheels spin a little bit faster for the road that it's on. See, the road's moving quite fast, but the wheels themselves are quite slow. So what we need to do is move that keyframe in by about 10 frames. And to do that, we're going to use the dope sheet, which allows us to manipulate keyframes. We could do it from the graph editor, but it's a lot easier if we go to our editor, select the dope sheet, and we now have these series of dots. And each dot represents a keyframe on each movement that we have keyframes allocated to. So if we look at the menu, we see we have a front wheel with a circle action, the circle action being the name of the object that we applied the action to. So the circle action is rotation, and that's where our keyframe is. We also have a cylinder, which is our road, and that also has a rotation keyframe, which is this bottom line here. And we can take these keyframes and move them around, duplicate them, change the spacing between them. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the keyframes from the wheel, move it in 10 frames, so keep an eye on our timeline down here, and you should see the wheel start to speed up. So if I right click along the top line where it says summary, you'll see that now just keyframes relating to this rotation action. There are no keyframes on the cylinder, so that's how you know this is all that's available for selecting. If I press my G, I can bring in and move the keyframes out and in. I can backwards almost. That's quite silly. If I bring them in, and if I watch my timeline, if I look, 10, is that fast enough? A little bit faster, I think. 25, it's almost there. Come on, there. I now confirm that with my left mouse button, and that looks to me like it's going at a fair old clip down the road. And that's the dope sheet. You can obviously do a lot more with that. You can insert keyframes there for each effect, add keyframes. The different options down here we can change from a dope sheet to an action editor. But cool. Anyway, let's end it there. Our animation is done. If we drop down our window, go into our camera view, scroll out a little bit, we can see our animated scene. If I shift click the particle emitter, just pause it quickly, go back to the first frame and set it all going. Why am I not getting leaves? Press play. Oh yes, here they come. Right, maybe the leaves are a bit too far away from the start of the scene. The scene's almost over before the leaves turn up. So I'm going to select the leaf mesh, bring it forward along the y-axis, bring it up on the z-axis, stop everything for the moment, press 0, go back to the start, press play. There we go, there's the leaves. But now they're going straight up in the air, far too high. You don't see them again until they come down later, so I'm going to rotate that. That's better. Now I can see what's going on. I'm going to take the plane, press RX, go back to the start, try that. That's it. Now the leaves are all going around the cylinder nicely. So if I look at my camera view, there they are. Excellent. So that's it. That's our animation done. In our next episode, we're going to look at the render settings, and we're going to learn out how to render the animation to an actual movie that you can put on YouTube or Facebook or something. Just put on a DVD and sell to your mates. Do whatever you want with it. It's up to you. It's your movie. You've made it. But we would appreciate you showing us your progress on Facebook and Twitter and Google Plus and all that good stuff. And don't forget to subscribe for the final lesson in this tutorial series. And we shall see you then. So, good night. Thank you very much.